what I want to start to look into in this shiur, and we're not going to finish it because I've been what I'm getting ahead of myself. One of the things that I said we will come back to, and it's still been very much on my mind, is just what was the practical reality of the Kohen Gadol when he went into the Kodesh HaKodeshim and did the sprinkling of the blood. Where exactly did he stand? And you might think this is not so hard, but there are a lot of things going on here. First of all, we learned that in Bayit Sheni, actually, Bayit Sheni was maybe the simplest because there was no Aron. And instead, he stood near the place, near the Even Shtiyah, where the Aron had been. But in the Mishkan and in Bayit Rishon, where there was an Aron and it was set up in a particular way, I want to have this very clear in my head exactly where he went when he went in and how he stood. So in order to put this together, we're going to review a little bit of what we've done. And I want to lay out now some of the basic sources from Chumash and to some degree from the Mishnah. And then I hope that next week I'll be able to tie it all together. But let's begin with the Mishnah that we had already learned. This is the beginning of Perek Chamishi. This is the beginning of Perek Chamishi. It says, they brought out for him the kaf and the machta. So the kaf and the machta, just to remind you, in this Mishnah, the kaf is to the kaf is the thing that he's going to be putting the ktoret into, and the machta here is going to be the coal pan. So tzilo takafia tamachta v'chafan melo chafnav, right? So he takes a whole handful of natan l'toch hakaf, and he puts it into the kaf. Hagadol lefi gadol, v'katan lefi katno. Right, in other words, each person, each kohen gadol, according to his size. That is, the measure here was always a relative measure based on the size of the hand of that particular kohen gadol. The kachaita midata, and that was its midah. And the Bartanur reminds us, the kachaita midata k'midata b'chutz, kach midata bifnim. What's the Mishnah adding here by saying kachaita midata, that was its measure? That the measure that it had outside, in other words, outside of the outside in the azara before he goes inside, that was the same midah, that was the same measure as inside. Just like outside, he would take this in his grasp, his actual grasp, and not with a kli, not with a vessel. Kach bifnim kishmarek torah mina kaf b'toch chafnav lo haya ma'areh b'chli asui k'midat chafnav elo toch chafnav mamash. So the same thing, when he went inside, he would shake out, or he would pour the ktoret from this kaf from this vessel that's going to hold the Ketoret on his way in, but he would pour it out into his hand and grasp it, and but not from a kli that was made exactly like the size of his hand. Mamash. But he didn't pour it out into another kli, he would pour it into his hand. Okay. Natal Tamachta Biminov at the kaf bismolo. He would take the machta in his right hand, and he put the kaf that has the ketoret in his left hand. So we pointed out the Bartanura was this idea Natal Tamachta Biminov Fishik Beida B'Chama. The kaf ketoret kala hemena. The kaf machta biminov the kaf bismolo. This is just to remind us that in general, there is an idea in the Mikdash that when you handle kelim, you handle them with your right hand. Whatever avodah you're doing, you do with your right hand. Here, the avodah is really going to be with the Torah. So arguably, he should have put the kaf in his right hand, but he puts the machta with the kol in it in his right hand. And that's for a practical reason, because it's heavier and it's also very hot. He needs to be able to control it better.
This is assuming that the Kohen Gadol is right-handed.
Well, I don't know if we brought this up before. It's interesting to say that. Not necessarily. In other areas of halacha, it varies from one halacha to another.
Do you remember we've discussed that, and right simply means dominant in this case?
So we did discuss it. Okay.
Yeah, the synapse is connecting.
Okay. Yeah, right. In other words, yamin in halachic sense doesn't necessarily mean the right hand, but like you say, means the dominant hand. And that's why a left-handed person, his dominant hand is his left hand, his weak hand is his right hand, and so he puts the tefillin shel yad on his right arm and not on the left arm, because the tefillin shel yad is supposed to go on your weaker hand. Yad kaha is the drasha, and I believe that it's the same thing here. I don't think this is considered to be a universal right. There are certain things that are universally right, like when you lean to the left on Leil HaSeder, because the insides of everybody are the same, whether you're right-handed or left-handed. You lean to the left in order to avoid choking when you're eating. So certain things are absolute right, and here I'm pretty sure that it's a relative right. It's a dominant. So he goes in. Until he gets to be between the two parachot, the two drapes, that differentiated between the Kodesh and the Holy of Holies. And there was one amma. The width of one amma was between these two parachot. And Rabbi Yossi Omer lo hayta sham el parochet echad bilvad shenemar v'ivdila haparochet lechem bein hakodesh v'kodesh hakodeshim. Okay, but actually, yeah, Rabbi Yossi brings a proof from the Mishkan, where the Mishkan refers to only one parochet, so he says that was also what was true in Beit Sheni. But we actually did spend some extra time on this, but I'll just remind you, looking at the Bartanura, says Lebein Shtei HaParochot, because we're going to actually come back to this question of the Shtei HaParochot and the Amatraksin and all those things that we had learned before. We need to revisit them. Lebein Shtei HaParochot, Lefi shenistabku b'bayit sheni im ha'mechitza mavdelet bein hakodesh u'bein kodesh hakodeshim שהייתה בבית ראשון, והיה אביה אמה, היא אותה אמה כלפנים או כלחוץ, right? Because the Chachamim in the Second Temple, at the time of the Second Temple, they were not sure about the division that was made between the Kodesh and the Kashim that had existed in Bayit Rishon, meaning the idea is that when they built Bayit Sheni, they were trying to imitate the way Bayit Rishon had been built, not necessarily for all details, but here was a detail that they wanted to try to replicate. Shaita b'Bayit Rishon v'haya avya ama, and that division that divided between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim and Bayit Rishon was 1 amma thick. Iota amma kalifnim o kalachutz. So the question is, that particular amma, did it belong to the Kedusha of the Kodesh, or was it part of the Kedusha of Kodesh HaKodeshim? Lefikach asu shtei parochot. So therefore, what they did is they made 2 parochot, one outer, one inner, and in between them they left the space of 1 amah, to take in between them the space that would have been where the mechitza by Rishon stood. Now, from here, okay, so this is all well and good. But one of the things that I think we should keep in mind as we're learning this is, okay, so what was this? This is describing the situation as it was in Bayit Sheni. What was the situation in the Mishkan? So in the Mishkan, there was only 1 parochet. How did the Kohen Gadol enter in the Mishkan? And now we also learned that in Bayit Rishon, there was this dvir that separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And so there also, how did the Kohen Gadol enter in Bayit Rishon? We only learned from the Mishnah here how he entered in Bayit Sheni, that he went in. We'll just read a little bit further. Right, so it's talking now about the Shtei Parochot again. So the outer Parochet, the one that you would see when you would walk into the Kodesh, that was folded back from the south, right? So when he walks in, he's coming in from the east, he's facing west, and he sees the Parochet. So to his left, which is due south, he would see the opening that's on the south, that's on the south side of the Parochet. And then he would walk in, he would go in the south, and then he would turn his face to the north, he'd walk north, and then when he came to the north end, he would be at the other opening, where the inner parochet is now folded back from away from the north, so that it's a space for him to walk. So once he got in, he would turn his face southward. And then he would walk with his left. In other words, his left would be with the parochet. So it sounds like he walks in and he's following along with the parochet to his left, right? So this is the inner parochet. And in terms of the layout of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the parochet is on the eastern side of the room, right? And then there's a wall on the western side, and there are walls on this north and south side. So the one place where there isn't an actual wall is the east side. He's now walking along the east side. We imagine his shoulder being very close to the eastern side, to the parochet. Until he gets to the aron. So let's once again, look at the Bartanura here. Malech benehen nichnas b'frifat hadarom, malech benehem ad shemagia lefrifat hatzafon. Okay, so he goes in where it was pulled back in the south, and he goes up to where it's pulled back in the north. Higil hatzafon mishin nichnas l'toch halal beit kodashim afach panav l'darom. So once he enters in, then he turns and faces south. To go in between the badim, right? So the badim are the staves that are attached to the aron, which is in the middle of this space, right? Shabadim hayu arukin ad haparochet. The badim were long and they reached the parochet. Rosho echad l'ma'arav, v'asheni lo l'mizrach. One end of the bad was toward the west, and one was toward the east. Echad b'rosh ha'aron atzafon, v'echad b'rosho l'daron. One was at the end of the aron on the north side, and one was at the end of the aron on the south side.
But in Beit Sheni there were no badim because there was no aron.
Right. So we'll explain that in a moment. But now, apparently, what's being described here is the reality as it would have existed in Beit Rishon, as we'll see. We're going to look at the psukim in Malachim. Ma'alech lismalo im haparochet, sha'malech mitzafon l'darom, smalo l'mizrach. This is just simple directions. If you're walking from north to south, then east is to your left. But parochet taita b'mizrach. Parochet was on the east. Okay, so that's fine. Ad shumagila ba'aron. So the Bartanur explains linkom aron. It comes to the place of the aron. Lola aron mamash. The Beit Sheni lo hayashama. By Shini, there was no longer an aron. So Achu Magia la aron. Okay, so now this is the part that I'm starting to. I want to understand this. So based on what it's saying, let's imagine though that there was an aron. We'll come back to this because this is part of this. Honestly, this is something that I still think I don't understand properly. If he's walking along next to the parochet, he won't be able. Let's say there was an aron. Let's say there was an aron there. Well, he won't be able to get past the bad. There are two badim that come all the way up to the parochet, right? I started to make an illustration, and I didn't finish it, but let's just do a very basic illustration here. You'll pardon my drawing skills for this purpose. Let's say we make the aron, right? So the aron was 1.5 by 2.5 amot, right? That's from the Torah. Torah gives us the midot. So, and as we'll see, the placement of the aron would have been, let's just pretend that those are attached. Those are the badim. So this is over here. Oh, wait a second. Okay, so over here is tzafon. Over here is darom. Over here is mizrach. And you can figure out where ma'arav is. So for highlighting sake, I'm going to make the parochet red. And as we'll see, actually the badim were supposed to have poked the parochet. Here I have them stopping short, but they actually poke into the parochet. So my question is, so exactly in a time when there was an actual Aron, do we understand the Mishnah to mean that when he came in, 1 second, we'll put the Kohen Gadol in purple. This will be a line that's supposed to indicate the Kohen Gadol. So he comes in from here, and it says he's walking along here. So if he's walking along here, what does he do when he gets to the bud? So does it mean that he actually walked next to the parochet, or that just he was walking parallel to the parochet, because he actually needs to get up here? So this is something that we need to understand, or at least I need to understand it. And of course, this is going to be very, very important. Right now, what he's doing, he's just setting up the Ketores. Let's just finish this little part of the Mishnah. Eventually, I think we'll revisit Mishnah where he comes in and starts to sprinkle the blood. Again, because I want to understand exactly where he was standing. So once he gets in, he puts the coal pan between the two staves, between the two badim. So what does that mean? Where exactly was that he puts it? Does it mean that he now puts it near the parochet? In other words, let's say he got up to the badim. Let's say he got up to the badim and he's holding the coal pan, and he takes the coal pan and maybe what it means is he sets it down here, but he doesn't actually have to physically go past the badim to do that. He can reach his hand with the coal pan and put it on the floor there. I'm not sure. I'm being honest. I'm not sure. I think that's what it means, but it's not entirely clear to me. Right, so he gathers up the ketores on top of the coals. So then the whole building is filled with smoke. So he's set up the ketores. So he goes and he leaves the same way he came. He says a little prayer in the outer chamber. He didn't go on at length with his davening so as not to strike fear in the populace. Once the Aron had been taken away, Even Haita Sham Yimot Nevi'im Rishonim. So there was stone there that was there from the time of the first prophets. Shtia Haita Nigret. It was called Shtia. It was 3 fingers above ground. Yaleh Hayanoten. And he would place the machta on that stone. Okay, then it's going to talk about the blood. We're going to leave that part of this now. So this is to set up for you. This is what I've been trying to figure out. How did this work practically in terms of the placement and so forth? So let's just remind ourselves of some of the basic texts that are going to be important for us to remember. So the first text for us to remind ourselves of is the Aron itself. So this is in Parshat Truma. And as you may recall from Parshat Truma, beginning of the parak is the command to get donations from everybody for all the materials that will be needed for the Mishkan. Then the first commandment to build something is the commandment to build the Aron. Yasu Aron atzei shitim amatayim v'chetzi arko v'yama v'chetzi rachbo v'yama v'chetzi komato. Okay, so the ark is made from acacia wood. It's 2.5 amot in length, 1.5 in width, and 1.5 in height. Tzipito to zahav tahor mibayit u'michutz tzapenu. You cover it with pure gold on the inside and the outside. You will cover it. Vasita alav zer zahav saviv. You put a zer, a kind of a running crown around it. How do I translate that? A circlet or a border. Okay. V'yatzakta lo arbata ba'ot zahav. So you're going to attach to it 4 golden rings. V'natata al arba pa'amotav. You put it on its 4 sides. Shtei taba'ot al tzalo ha'echad. Shtei taba'ot al tzalo ha'sheni. Pa'amotav apparently means like its legs. And then you're going to put 2 taba'ot on each side. So then you make 2 badim out of the acacia wood and you cover them with gold. Now notice it doesn't tell us how long the badim are. It just says you need to make badim. You put the badim through the rings that are on the sides of the Aron in order to carry the Aron with them. But tabaot Aron yu badim lo yasuru. The staves have to stay inside the rings and not be removed from them. V'natata el Haron et ha'idut asher tenirach. And then you put the testimony that I'm going to give you, or that I give you into the Aron. The next thing is going to be the kaporet. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just to review, so it's 2.5. The Aron is 2.5 amot long. It's 1.5 amot wide and 1.5 amot high, and it has 2 badim, 1 on each side. So now we have some practical questions. First of all, how big is an amah? And I don't know if we touched on this before or not, but there's some machloket Tanaim, which we'll look at in Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda have a machloket about how many tfachim were in an amah. There is an idea that there are 2 amah. There's an amah that's 5 tfachim, 5 handbreadths long, and there's an amah that's 6 handbreadths long. Of course, it'll make a difference for different things in the Beit HaMikdash, which measure you're using. We'll look at that question in a moment. It's an important question to keep in mind. And then the other thing, as I said, we don't know how long these badim are. We do understand that they have a practical purpose. They're not there just for adornment. They're there to carry it, right? Because they have to be able to make the Aron portable. So the other thing is, it doesn't tell. It says when it talks about the placement of the badim. What does it say? You take these. you take these 4 rings of gold, you put them on its 4 legs, and 2 are on one side, 2 are on the other side. Which side? Think of the Aron now, like, right, we have, let's go back to my little illustration, right? So we're looking at the Aron. It has 4 sides. So I put 2 on one side and 2 on the other side. So which side do I put them on the width side, or I put them on the long side? Doesn't say. I put it the way I drew the picture is based on the conclusion, but we should point out that the Torah itself doesn't tell us.
I always imagined that the Aron is the other way around, so that the badim are fixed to the long side, not to the short side.
Okay, so let me ask you something, because it's not, it's a lo mefurash b'Torah, right? The Torah doesn't tell us. Why is it stam, or do you have a reason that in your mind why you thought it would have been like that? I see you laughing, but it's a serious question. Lo shomim.
It looks like a coffin. I thought it would look like a coffin.
Right, and that's the way people carry coffins.
Yes.
Right?
That's the way I thought. I always imagined it like this. So with the tabaot are fixed to the long side, not to the short side.
Not to the short side, not to the width side.
Width side, yes.
Right? It's a completely reasonable thing to think, right? It's not clear. The other question is also the way in my little illustration, you see I have it pointed in a certain direction where the long side is running parallel to east-west as opposed to north-south. And you know, if we skip ahead in Shmot, just a second. My internet is a little stubborn. Hold on. If we skip ahead and just see in Vayakel what actually happened later on. Vayas b'tzolei at Aaron atzei shitim ha'matayim v'chetz Yaakov yamav v'chetz Rachel yamav v'chetz Kamato v'yitzapei zahav tahor מבית ומחוץ ויעש לו זר זהב סביב ויצוק לו 4 טבעות זהב על 4 פעמותיו 2 טבעות על צלע אחד ו2 טבעות על צלע שנית ואז בדי יצא שיטים ויצף אותם זהב ויביא את הבדים וטבעות על צלעות הארון לשאת את הארון ויעש כפורת, we didn't look at the kaporet yet, but he makes the kaporet he makes kruvim והיו הקרובים פורסי כנפיים למעלה, שחופים בחנפיהם על הכפורת, פני איש האחיו ועל הכפורת היו פני הקרובים. In other words, basically, without going into more detail, the description of the Aron that the Saleh makes seems completely identical to the way it's described in Parshat Truma, but it still doesn't give us these details. And now we have an additional detail that we don't know, which is exactly how did it stand in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Right now, it's actually being built. You know, in the previous chapter, right? So you all know this, right? That the Asiyah, right, the actual manufacture of the Mishkan the way it's described, is not the same order that the different parts are given, right? So the Aron is the first thing that's commanded, but it's not necessarily the first thing that was given, that was actually put together, because for practical reasons, the outer part, the Mishkan, gets built first, and then the Aron is installed, right? They don't build the Mishkan around the Aron, which is standing there. But we would like to know, okay, so where did it stand when it was inside the Mishkan? So for the moment, it's not clear. Torah is not telling us that particular detail. I'm gonna jump. I want to look at Sukkim and Sefer Melachim about Bayit Rishon. Before I do, one second. Yeah, I prepared this. I'm going to skip for the moment to the Mishnah Masechet Menachot. So in Masechet Menachot, in the 11th chapter, one of the subjects that comes up are the kelim in the Beit HaMikdash. And begins Mishnah Hey, it says, Hashulchan orko asara v'rachbo hamisha. There's a very particular discussion about the Shulchan, which is, of course, where the Lechem HaPanim was placed. So the Shulchan was 10 by 5. In other words, it was 10 tfachim, 5 tfachim. The description of the Shulchan I skipped over the rest of the discussion of the kaparet and stuff. This is the description of the Shulchan in the Torah, right? Rasita Shulchan Atzei Shitim Amatayim Arko. It's 2 amot long. The Amah Rachbo, and 1 Amah wide. The Amah V'chetzi Komato, and it's 1.5 high. It's the same height as the Aron, but it doesn't have this, and it's the same width, it's the same height, it's the same width, but it's not the same length, right? The Aron is 2.5 amot, and the Shulchan is 2 amot. So now, when we skip over here to the Mishnah is telling us in Tfachim its width, right? So if its dimension. So its length is 10 and its width is 5. So this tells me how big was an Amah. If when it says its length is 10, it means its length is 10 tfachim, and its width is 5 tfachim. So we know from the Torah. What does the Torah say the length of the Shulchan is? 2 amot. And its width is 1, right? Is 1.
So it's 5.
So it's 5. So according to this, the way what the Mishnah is out for us, by the way, I made a mistake. It's the width of the Shulchan was smaller than the width of the Aron by half. All right. The length is 10, the width is 5. So it means that according to this Tana, the Amah that was used for measuring the shulchan was an amma of 5 tvachim. Yoma Panim, the actual loaves that sat on the shulchan, are kan asara. They were 10 long. There were 10 tvachim long. V'rachban chamisha, and they were 5 wide. Notein arko keneg rachbo shel shulchan. So you would take the length, the length of the bread, and you would lay it across the shorts, across the width. Okay, so width of the shulchan is 5. The length of each bread is 10. So then what do you do? Notein arko keneged rachbo shulchan b'chofel tfachayim u'mechtzimikan, tfachayim u'mechtzimikan. You bend it. Each loaf of bread, it was laid out on the shulchan, and then it would be bent up. Right? You have to bend it up by 2.5 tfachim on each side. So now only 5 tfachim is sitting on the width, which is 5 tfachim, and you have 2.5 going up in the air. Nimtza arko malei kol rachbo shel shulchan. Right? So now the length of the folded bread is taking up the whole width of the shulchan. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the way Rabbi Yehuda said it happened. Rabbi Meir Omer, Ashulchan arko shnei nasa, v'rachbo shisha. The shulchan was 12 tfachim, and its width was 6 tfachim. So how big is the nama according to Rabbi Meir?
Now it has to be 6.
It's 6. In other words, his dimensions are changed according to him. And in other words, everybody has to agree what Torah says. The Torah says that the shulchan is 2 amot long, and it's 1 amma wide, and it's 1.5 high. That's fixed. Problem is, the Torah didn't tell us exactly how big the amma itself is. The old Bill Cosby bit with Noah, if you're familiar with that, where God comes to Noah and says, "Noah, I want you to build me an ark." And there's a whole thing, but one of the things God says to him is you have to build it, 300 cubits by 70. So Noah says, "Right, what's a cubit?" Anyway. So that's our problem. We have the same problem as Noah. What's a cubit? What's an amma? So according to Rabbi Meir, an amma itself is 6 tfachim, 6 hand widths, hand breadths. So therefore, if the shulchan is 2 amot, now it's going to be 12. It's going to be 12 by 6 instead of 10 by 5. Lechem hapanim arko asara is on the size of the lechem hapanim. Yeah, he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that the lechem hapanim was the same size that Rabbi Yehuda had, and it's measured in tfachim. And so it's 10 long, it's 10 tfachim long, and it's 5 wide. So once again, he's going to say the same thing. I'm going to put the long side along the width of the shulchan. The shulchan is 6 wide, and now I have 4 tfachim. I have 4 extra tfachim, 2 on each side of the shulchan hanging over. So what do I do with them? Chofel tfachayim mikan, tfachayim mikan, tfachayim revach ba'emtza. All right, so I'm going to fold the bread up 2 tfachim on each side, because the bread now I don't need to do 2.5. I just need to subtract 4 from the length, from its length of 10. Right, so it's 10, and then I fold up 2 here. I fold up 2 here, but Now remember, there are two ma'arachot of bread. So the way Rabbi Yehuda had it, each bread is 5 tfachim. The whole length of the shulchan is 10 tfachim. So I can put two breads, one next to the other. That will take up the whole length of the shulchan. And of course, I'm going to fold up the bread. How it gets stacked up and so forth, we'll look at that in a second. Let's just talk about the first two breads that sit on the shulchan. According to Rabbi Yehuda, each bread is 5 in width. The shulchan is 10 in length. I'm putting them 5 next to 5. So once I put each ma'aracha, there's no more room left on the shulchan. And that's going to be a question because one of the other dinim that the Torah tells us regarding the shulchan is you had to put these frankincense holes with frankincense. You had to put lebona on the shulchan. So exactly where it's going to be, that's going to be a question, according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Meir, his dimensions are different for the shulchan, but they're the same for the bread. So the bread will have one bread is going to be 5 here, it's going to be 5 here, but the whole length of the shulchan is 12, right? According to Rabbi Meir. So I have 2 extra tfachim between the breads that I didn't have with Rabbi Yehuda. So tfachim mikan, tfachim rech be'emtza, kedei shetehei aruch min hashevet b'nei. That's to keep it to keep air circulating between the rows of breads. Abba Shaul Meir Sham hayu notnin shnei v'zichei levona shel lechem hapanim. According to Abba Shaul, that's actually where they put the b'chim that held the levona, that held the frankincense, in that area of 2 tfachim. So Amrulo, they said to Abba Shaul, Halo kvar ne'amar v'natata aha ma'arechet levona zakah. Right, when the Torah tells us to put the levona with the bread, the way it's phrased, it says, "V'natata al harechet levona zakah." You should put it on the ma'arechet. So it's not like the ma'arechet is going to be the stacks of bread. So it sounds like you should put the levona on the stacks of bread. So they challenge Abba Shaul. They say, what do you mean it was in between the breads? It's supposed to be on the ma'arechet. It should be on each ma'arechet of the bread. That doesn't the Torah also say that Matei Menashe was next? Al sometimes means on top of. It could also mean next to, right? In the beginning of Bamidbar, when it's laying out the Galim, it says, Dego Machanei Ephraim, Tzibotam Yama, V'Nasibnei Ephraim Elishama ben Amihud, Utzvaov Kudehem 40,000 500, Ba'alav, next to him, not on top of him, but next to him was the tribe of Menashe. In other words, here clearly, Alav clearly means next to, and not on top of. And this is how Abba Shaul understands when the Torah is talking about the Zichei Levona, that it means they need to be next to the Marachot, but not on top of the Marachot. Now, we still haven't gotten to the Aron, but it's important, I think, to understand this. Eventually, I want to get to the end of the next Mishnah here. Arba'as snifin shel zahav hayusham. So there were 4 snifin. The snifin here are essentially sides that are snif here you could translate as appendage. See how they translate. There are 4 panels. They kind of okay. All right. I would translate it as appendages. They were 4 appendages. In other words, we're don't actually lay the bread out on the shulchan and then just lay each bread on top of each other. Although I'll come to that later. But what they do, right? The Torah also mandates that there are going to be forms. They're like tavniyot that are going to hold each bread. And so those are going to get stacked up, and those are going to rest on like half pipes. You're going to rest on half pipes. Let's read and I'll explain it. So there were these 4 appendages that were attached to the shulchan. Their heads, or the tops of these snifim, tops isn't the right word, but you'll see. In other words, that the way it came up, there's like let's see if I can. Let's say this is a snif, and so there's going to be itzulim. There's going to be parts of this side that are sort of peeled down, and they're going to be across from each other. It's the way you build shelves. You're going to have like 2 panels, one across, or 2. We'll call them panels. We'll call them appendages. It's kind of a funny word, but think of them as like 2 sides, and then on each side there's going to be things sticking out here, and then you're going to lay across them these split pipes here. Let's see. They would lean on them, or they would rest on them. 2 on each set. Yes.
Just to the art school Chuma actually has a very clear diagram of this.
Very good. There were 28 kanim, kechatzi kaneh chalul, right? So there were 28 kanim, and each one was like a half of a hollow reed. But they weren't made out of wood. They weren't reeds. They were made out of metal. There was 14 for each side. Setting up the kanim were taken down did not push away the Shabbat. Rather, Kohanim would go in before Shabbat and remove them, and place them to the length of the shulchan. A lot of what I did now is to build up just to this point here. Kol hakelim shahayu b'mikdash or kanla or koshel bayit. All of the kelim that were in the mikdash, their length was to the length of the house. In other words, the placement of the kelim in the Beit HaMikdash, they were placed lengthwise relative to the Beit HaMikdash itself. And these kanim, when they were removed from this ma'arechet, they would be placed, according to Tosfot, they were placed actually on the floor lengthwise, in the same direction that the shulchan was. So, I'm sorry, somebody is playing various music out front. So what? Okay. So what Bartanura said earlier. Wait a second. We saw this. Sorry, that rattled me. Okay. Let's make another crude little drawing. Let's get rid of this drawing. Let's start again. Let's say this is the Kodesh, right? So I'm just going to make a wall here and a wall here. And this is the north side again. This is the south side. And this is the east side. So now the Shulchan, if we say it goes according to it, it's all of the kelim in the Beit HaMikdash are laid in along the length. Their length goes along with the length of the Beit HaMikdash. So of course the north and the south walls, those are the long walls. In Beit Sheni and in Beit Rishon, it's described that those walls were 60 amot by 20 amot, right? So if I put the shulchan, the length of the shulchan with the length of the Beit HaMikdash, then it would be like that. Now, you may remember one of the things that we looked into, and I'm going to try to tie this in, if not next week, then the week after, was the placement of the menorah. So I'll talk about that in a second. Basically, the Mizbeach was roughly in the middle, or maybe precisely in the middle. And then according to the Stam Mishnah that we just learned,
this is the Mizbeach HaZahav?
This would be the Mizbeach HaZahav. This is a very crude drawing. I'm going to try to make better drawings. Or, Michael, maybe I'll look at those drawings, but I think you sent me some. We'll talk about drawings later. According to the Mishnah that we just learned, that said all of the kelim in the Mikdash, that their length went along, was parallel to the length of the Beit HaMikdash itself. So then the menorah would have been like that. It would have been going from, right? It would go from east-west, would be parallel to the south, to the southern wall. And that's the way we learned it when we learned in Masechet Tamid that Chnas, right, the Kohen, not the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen who had the task of fixing the menorah in the morning. So he would come in, and there would be the 7 candles, or the 7 lamps, better word, the 7 lamps of the menorah, and then he would look to see what was going on with the first 2. The second one, the first one would be closest to the eastern wall, and then the second one was called the Ner Ma'aravi. The second was the western lamp, even though it wasn't the closest to the west, but it was the first one that wasn't closest to the east, right? We'll look again. There's a machloket in Menachot about the placement of the menorah, whether it went along whether it was parallel to the southern wall or was it parallel to the eastern wall. we'll back to that. That was a question that we had raised, and we still have some to tidy up from there. So now, based on the Mishnah just learned, also, this is not a very good illustration. It's also not scale or anything like that. But then say this would have been the Dvir, right? In Bayit Rishon, this would be the Dvir, that would be the separation between the Kodesh and the Kodesh. And then I would imagine, right, if I only had that Mishnah, then I would think that I would place the length of Aron. This would consider this to be like a smaller version. I would place the length of the Aron is along the length, parallel to the north and south, because that's what the Mishnah said. It's that all of the Elim and the Beit HaMikdash, their length was parallel to the length of the Beit HaMikdash itself. But it turns out everybody agrees that the Aron is the exception to this. So actually, the length of the Aron is going to be parallel to the eastern and western walls. Let's come back. So here in the Bartanuri, here in Menachos, we don't have to go through all of them right now, but let's look at what he says about a particular question. All of the kelim that were in the Mikdash, their length went along the length of the bayit, of the house. So what does it mean? They went from east to west, the way we illustrated. Chutz min ha'aron, except for the Aron, sharkol rachbel bayit. Its width was parallel to its length was parallel to the width of the bayit. Shehabadim sheba'aron hayu boltim v'dochakim beparochet v'domin kishnei dadei isha. Because the staves that were in the Aron, they would shout and press against the parochet, and they looked like the two nipples of a woman. Shnemar vayarichu abadim vayeru. They lengthened or pulled out the beam, and they were seen. Vahabadim l'rachbo shon hayumenachim. The badim were on the width, they're placed on the width side of the Aron. And why? Now he'll explain why. The way Paul, or maybe any of us could have imagined, if you place them on the long side as opposed to the width side, so you have to think of it practically. Right, then the distance between each of the badim would be the same width of the Aron. The hainu amta ufal was 1.5 amot. Mikan utravre anosim bishnei badim et ha'aron shnayim mikan ushnayim mikan. Lohavu matzi likanes ben bad levad. The way the Aron was carried by 4 people. So you have 2 on one side, on the other side. They're lifting it up by the badim. But now, if you imagine that the badim are running along the length of the Aron, now there's only 1.5 amot space between them, and the people who are carrying it are going to bump up against each other. There's not really enough room for them to properly carry it. I see Paul is shaking his head. but this
They can
was,
be outside. Why should they be inside between the badim? I thought they would be outside.
so I was thinking about this also. I think we can look in the Gemara on this, but not tonight. I think the reality was that they would in any event be completely on the outside. You need to have some room for, even if you want to say they should be on the outside, but they're not going to be completely on the outside. There's still going to be some part of their body that's sticking in, that's sticking into that space. So right, so there wouldn't be space for them to get in between the two badim. Rather, it must be must be that the staves were placed on the width side. And the staves then were going from east to west. Because they were knocking up against the parochet. So it'll turn out that the length of the aron is going to be placed parallel to the width of the. Excuse me. In the last few minutes, let's just take a look for a moment in Malachim. There are two important passages here. Actually, one second. The other thing that we didn't discuss. So before we get to Malachim, and maybe this is where we should bring it for today. Let's go back a minute to Shmo. Let's go back to a minute to Shmod and to the Aron. All right, so Torah describes how the is built, and then it says Vasita Kaporet Zahav Tahor. So you make the kaporet, which is going to be this cup of the Aron. Amatayim v'chetzi Yaakov, Yama v'chetzi Rachba. So its length and its width is the same as the length and the width of the Aron itself. Vasita Shnaim Kruvim Zahav. You'll make 2 kruvim of gold. Mikshata, so it should be made from a solid piece or a beaten piece, a solid beaten piece of gold. Mishnei ktsota kaporet, from the two sides of the kaporet. You'll make 1 crew from one edge and 1 crew from the other edge. Mina kaporet, from the kaporet. Asu et kruvim al shnei ktsotav. Now, this is just an aside. So just to mind that the Aron, as well as the Mizbeach and as well as the Shulchan, are in principle, they're all kelim made of wood, and then they're covered with gold. Now, gold, of course, can be beaten to quite thin, right? Paper thin, onion skin thin. But so the gold that covers them is not a lot of weight to the kelim. But we're talking about the kruvim, and so these kruvim have to be entirely made out of gold. And as you know, gold is actually very heavy. It's very, very heavy. So the reasons I mention this is because when I think of people carrying the Aron, it might have been a lot heavier than we might think it was. because of the golden kruvim. All right. So what do we see? The kruvim in the Mishkan, they were made from the kaporet, right? So they sat on the kaporet and they were made from the kaporet. This is not the same as it was in Bayit Rishon. This is the way it was though in the Mishkan. So the kruvim are going to be on top. Their wings are spread, and the wings are coming over the kaporet. Ufneihem yishal achiv. They're facing one another. El kaporet ne'akruvim. They're facing also the kaporet. It's a kind of a funny thing. We don't have to get into that detail right now. Tatat kaporet Aaron milamala. You put it on the Aaron on top. El Aaron titaidut asher teni emet. And you'll put the edut into the Aaron. Clearly, this is not meant. This is actually an example of something that the Haktava Kabbalah mentioned when we, in the last, I think it was the last year that I did, where we're talking about the order of the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol in the Beit Hamikdash. Here's an example where the Torah gives us something that sounds like it's chronological order, but it's clearly not in chronological order. Because if you put the kaporet on the Aron, you can't then put the edut into the Aron. So the way you have to understand the pasuk, you're going to put the kaporet on top of the Aron, on the Aron from on top, into the Aron that you have put, that you already put the edut in. Let's just bracket that. It's not so important what we're doing tonight, but just to bear in mind. This is where I'm going to become known to you. I'll speak to you from on top of the kaporet between the two Asher Aaron edut. Everything that you're going to command Israel. And then it talks about the Shulchan, and we may look at that a little bit more closely next time, but we'll see basically what we saw in the Mishnah is a way of understanding these psukim, Shulchan. Here at the end where it's talking about the Shulchan, it says, Vasita karotav v'chapotav uksotav right? So what are all these that are attended to the Shulchan? These are the different parts of the Shulchan which we saw being explained in the Mishnah and the Nachot. Okay. I think we'll stop here. What I was trying to do tonight is present to you this question of what was the reality of Kohen Gadol when he went into the Kodesh HaKodeshim in the Mishkan, in Bayit Ton and Bayit Sheni. And we may also ask the question, what will it be like in Bayit Shlishi? Is it the same as before? Is it going to be different? But I just wanted to know the geography. I want to know, where does he go? Where does he stand? Where exactly is he putting down the machta? Where is he standing exactly when he is throwing the blood? And in order to understand that well, we have to go through and understand, these different nitzunim. So we looked at what the Torah says about the Aron, and we also looked somewhat on. We'll see next week, look in Malachim, we'll look at the way the Aron and the Kruvim are described in Bayit Rishon. And of course, the dimensions of the Mishkan are different than the dimensions of Bayit Rishon and Bayit Rishon and Bayit Sheni are much larger. And the Kruvim are qualitative different because they don't sit on the Kaporet. Right, they're very big and they take up a lot of space. And then it brings up questions about how did everything fit into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, right? And so you may know the Gemara says that the Aron stood by way of a nes in Bayit Rishon, because there wasn't theoretically any place for it to be. So I think that's where we're going to go next time. I want to look at Melachim, and then we'll look at, there's a sugya in Baba Batra, and then I'll bring it back to a sugya in Masech. Michael Schwartz, I see you ran to get a book. Did you want to, were you also just looking at illustration?
Yeah, I was just looking at pictures. Yeah.
I think you have good pictures. You can scan them for me, and maybe we'll be able to use them. I'm going to try to make my own, because so far the pictures, like Michael Warner, you sent me some nice pictures from Corinne, I think, but they don't have all the details that I need. They're not quite exact what I'm looking for. But if you, in any event, anybody who thinks they have good pictures of these things, send them to me, and maybe we can incorporate them. It'll save me some time and effort. So I hope this was as interesting as it was to me. This sugya in Masechet Menachot, it's a fascinating thing. 2 Shabbos ago, I spent most of Shabbos just trying to understand the Mishnah that I explained to you. So I hope it's easy.
For me, it turned around 90 degrees around.
Literally. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating thing. And the other thing which we didn't get to in the Mishnah Menachot, but if you've learned Menachot, so you know that that in Bayit Rishon, Bayit Sheni, they're just that it wasn't Shulchan. There were other Shulchanot that were in Kodesh that the Torah doesn't describe, and we'll bring that into play also. But I'm trying to do a lot of things here, but the main thing right now that I'm really concerned still is exactly how did the Kohen Gadol do what he did in the Kodeshim. But it's also connected, as you see, to the way things that were going on in the Kodesh. So we'll pick it up next time. I think that's it for now, unless anybody has anything to add. I think we'll stop here. Okay, so hopefully I'll see you next week. Michael Schwartz. Wait, so Michael Schwartz, where are you going to be next week?
Next week I should be here. Following week.
And then the coming week you're going. Okay. All right. Laila Tov, everybody.
All right. Good night. Thank you.